Welcome, everyone, to the Red Planet Live. I am your host, Ashton Zeth. I'm elated to be hosting the Mars Society podcast and leading the conversation about human exploration of the universe and the future settlement of Mars. As a longtime space enthusiast, I am passionate about STEM education and making humanity an interplanetary species. So thank you, everybody, for joining today and supporting Red Planet Live. So as usual, before we kick off the conversation, just want to do a quick Mars Society announcement. As you know, it is the season of giving. So how about giving the perfect gift to your space enthusiast? It's the holiday season, so please explore the Mars Society online shop. We've got everything from apparel and accessories to collectibles. Sometimes you'll see I've got a few kind of floating around here, like the Mars snow globe is right there. So you'll find some of those cool items on the website, everything that you may need for your space lover. Not only will you find unique gifts, but every purchase also supports the Mars Society's mission to advance the exploration and settlement of Mars. So visit themarsstore.com today and give a gift that's truly out of this world. All right, so want to introduce today's guest. Today I'm speaking with Rod Pyle, who's an acclaimed author, editor, and keynote speaker specializing in space exploration, technology, and innovation. He has written over 18 books, including Space 2.0, which I have read, and Heroes of the Space Age, which are recognized as essential reading by NASA, aerospace leaders, and the U.S. Air Force. Rod also serves as editor-in-chief of Ad Astra, the National Space Society's quarterly magazine, and contributes to Space.com, Popular Science, NASA JPL, and other leading publications. He's a frequent speaker at major events. He's even delivered talks for the Smithsonian Institution, IBM, and Northrop Grumman. Rod holds a BA from the Art Center College of Design and a master's from Stanford University. His expertise on the new space age continues to inspire and inform audiences worldwide. Everybody, let's welcome Rod.
Hey, will you be my agent?
Happy to do that for you.
That's pretty good.
I'm always happy to serve a fellow space enthusiast and expert in the industry. However you need my help, I'll be glad to do it.
Excellent. Thanks for having me here. This is really fun. I've been hoping to do it for a while.
And I'm so excited to chat with you. Okay, you have to tell us, what is your background? Where are you? Because that looks way more beautiful than the virtual ones we see sometimes.
So I'm down by the Queen Mary in Long Beach. I have a boat down here, and it's all lit up for Christmas. So as soon as it gets dark, you'll see the red and green lights across the top, and they have the smokestacks wrapped in white lights. So it's pretty. It's cold, but it's pretty. And when I say cold, I see we have somebody here from Finland. I know we have somebody from New England at least. So I apologize, because to me, 60 degrees is pretty chilly.
Well, everybody's jealous of the warm weather on the water, the fire you got going. Well, I also am jealous. We have snow here in Eastern Washington, so it's a little chilly on my end as well. But you're giving us some warm vibes, so it'll keep us.
I'll send the warmth your way.
I appreciate that. Well, on Red Planet Live, I do a segment called Question of the Day. It's just meant to be an icebreaker. I promise, no right or wrong answers. Just want to hear your opinion. But we're sticking with our holiday theme, season of giving. And so as the old adage goes, it's better to give than to receive. So today's question is, what is one nice thing that you're doing for somebody else this holiday season? Besides, gifts and celebrating with family.
Besides being selfish, let's see. I just became part of a new publishing enterprise. We're in stealth mode at this point, but I'm working with a couple of space writers whose names you'd recognize, and I'm doing that for no fee. So that is my giving back to the community. And part of the reason I decided to do it, it's funny because it came about right as I was trying to sell book number 21, which I just started on. And, a publisher doesn't have a lot of risk if you've written 20 books. It's like, come on, you guys, you may not love it, but at least it'll get finished. I'm reliable. Mm-hmm. And I had a really good year with 4 releases in 2019, including Space 2.0. Thanks for buying that. And we were going from publisher to publisher to publisher, and it just wasn't happening. I was about to give up. And I thought, well, I'll join this new publishing venture, and then I'll just do it there. But we ended up getting a deal with Smithsonian, thank goodness. But I stuck with the publishing venture because I felt like, there's a lot of wonderful space books out there. There's a handful of publishers that specialize in it. University of Nebraska Press is one of the really good ones. Colin Burgess runs that book series, Outward Odyssey. And there's Apogee and Springer, and that's kind of it. There's a couple of other small ones, but we thought, this would be a chance to do something where we don't necessarily have to really make much money since we're not
Mhm.
paying ourselves. We'll just do it because it's good for the community. So at some point, we'll open the doors and people can come and pitch and do all that kind of stuff. But that's probably the only true good deed I'll do this year. How
Okay,
about
well,
you?
your good deed and giving to others is way cooler than mine. During the holidays, I like to make molasses cookies. And so I made a big batch and I took them to my neighbors. I've mailed them to some of my family. So Grammy Alice, if you're listening, keep an eye on the mail. You got some molasses cookies. I typically make them around the holidays and they're delicious. My husband is my taste tester. I think he ate like 9 or 10 of them already. So that's a good sign. They must be pretty tasty. So that is my good deed. Just like spreading some holiday cheer by giving out
I
cookies.
hadn't thought about molasses cookies for probably 5 years until you just now mentioned it. So thanks a
Okay,
lot.
well, well, I don't know, how we deliver to a boat, but if you send me your address, I'll send you some cookies.
I don't live here. I'll send you my address, but
There
thank
we
you.
go.
That's very sweet.
I've got plenty more. So, I
All
tripled
right.
that. Lots of cookies to give out. But
Outstanding.
I'm so excited to chat with you. So thank you for giving me some time today.
Sure.
I had a lot of questions prepared for you, so we're going to try to rally through those. But just wanted to kick off the conversation and just see how did your career as always interested in being how passion shaped your career.
So you're buffering a little bit, but I think I got the gist of it. So I'm old. So I grew up during the space race and was around when the Apollo missions were flying. I think the first space mission I remember was one of the Gemini missions. I remember trying to understand what they were saying on the radio. But if you were alive back then, it was an amazing time because there are missions of exploration and discovery heading off to the moon as often as every 10 weeks sometimes. So my parents were kind. They'd let me stay home from school and I'd bring 2 or 3 TV sets in the living room, set up my own little mission control. So that's when I got the bug. And I decided I knew I wasn't going to be an astronaut, but I thought, okay, I'm going to be a space scientist. So I headed off to UCLA after high school, and differential calculus and I didn't get along, differential equations rather. So I ended up deciding I'd be a better storyteller of this stuff than a practitioner. And so that was kind of the beginning of it. I got waylaid into a career in TV commercials for about a decade. Spent a bunch of time making mostly space-themed documentaries for the History Channel. Worked on Star Trek visual effects for a while, which was cool because it was still space. It was just fake space. But finally, 2005, I got an offer to write my first book for Smithsonian, and that's when it really came back around. So I was in my 40s, and I thought, this is great because after years of trying to, the History Channel would say, okay, we want a show about the Apollo program. We got 44 minutes. I say, I can't even tell you Apollo 8 in 44 minutes. No, you got to do it. Just forget all those other flights. So the nice thing about writing books is once you sort of sold your theme to the publisher, they leave you alone for a year and you can toil in relative neglect and secrecy and then come out with something that hopefully people want to see. And it's just great. And then in 2017, I started doing Ad Astra magazine. So now those are the 2 things that keep me busy besides working on this old boat.
To keep you busy. Well, it cut out a little bit on my end, but I think I heard you say you worked on, was it Star Trek is what I heard?
So yeah, I worked for
So,
3 seasons on in the effects department for Deep Space Nine, and then a
cool.
couple years later, so that was when they still had miniature models, and that was great because you're playing with toys that are man-sized, right? And then about 6 years later, I started a small company, and we did the early pre-visualization work for Battlestar Galactica. But then they took off to Vancouver and wanted us to move up there, and I thought, nah, I want to stay in LA. So that was my brief career in visual effects, but it was a lot of fun.
That is
And I
really
think we
cool.
lost you again.
I know it keeps
There
cutting
you
out.
go.
I'm so sorry about that. Okay, you can hear me again.
Yeah.
Well, you've written exclusively and extensively about the new space age, in specifically this book, Space 2.0. Can you explain to us what is Space 2.0, and what do you think are some of the biggest opportunities for future of human space exploration?
Ooh, that's a nice big overarching question. So that came about because I'd written a bunch of historical books and I really liked it, but I thought, I want to do something that's forward looking and that
Mm-hmm.
has some policy discussion in it and so forth. And I trotted that book all over with my agent, with all over the known universe, and it just wasn't happening. And finally, I was talking to Stan Rosen, who at that point was part of the senior leadership for the National Space Society. And he said, "Well, how about if we help you do it?" And, if you're an author in today's world, you go, "Is there money attached?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Good." So
Of
they
course.
helped underwrite that. And it was a chance, besides what I've already mentioned, being forward looking and so forth. There's always a selfish motivation in there, and this one was, hey, I get to spend a year talking to really important people in various space programs around the world and so forth. So the research phase is always in some ways the most fun. So I think what came to me in the writing of that book that was meaningful, it's hard to look ahead because if you're as old as I am, you've seen design study after design study after design study for how we're going to get to Mars. Von
Mm-hmm.
Braun wanted, 10 big, enormous spacecraft with gliders that are going to go down and then right themselves and come back. That didn't happen. Had all these design reference mission designs. We've had what Dr. Zubrin has done, which makes a lot more sense in many ways. Um, so once you've absorbed all this stuff, it's really hard. You can't come out and say, okay, here's how we're going to do it. But I just wanted to have a chance to bring to people the exploration of the ideas of the various ideas of how we might. So whether it's sending humans to Mars, the big picture space settlement stuff, or even just getting back to the moon, that was really the idea behind it. And I wanted to have the international angle because I had never really written about that much. So this
Mm-hmm.
gave me a chance to try and peel back the layers surrounding the Chinese space program, which I was doing this in 2017, 2018. They weren't talking to anybody. So we had to have some clandestine conversations that probably got some people in trouble. Um, and the Russians, of course, and India and a handful of others.
Mm-hmm.
So it left me, I guess personally, it left me feeling very optimistic because this was right as SpaceX was rounding the corner in terms of getting ready to fly people. They were certainly flying lots of cargo. And a few months before we went to press, the Falcon Heavy flew.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been waiting for this since the last Saturn V went up. I know most people watching this are probably children of the shuttle era, and the shuttle was magnificent. But somehow, big multiple stick rockets are a little different. And I got invited to a number of press events and so forth for the Falcon Heavy, but I had to stay home because I knew I was going to get a little weepy, and sure enough, I did. And regardless of what you think of Elon, he's brilliant, he's crazy, he's a monster. People have all kinds of opinions.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of putting that car with that guy sitting in it up top was probably the premier public relations move of the 21st century, and that was just unbelievable. But I digress.
Iconic. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
going to ask you kind of what you thought about some of the things that are happening right now. Obviously, we recently saw the nomination of Jared Isaacman for
Yeah.
NASA, leading NASA. What are your thoughts there? Do you see this as a good thing, a positive move? Are we going to see the commercial industry really start to take over with NASA?
So I've been rubbing shoulders with some people that were inside the loop for that coming decision
Mm-hmm.
probably 6 weeks, 2 months ago. And I said, who's on the short list? And the obvious names popped up. Jared Isaacman was not one of them. And
Mm-hmm.
so when that announcement was made, my jaw kind of fell. And I thought, and if you have you had him on the show perchance before?
I haven't. I would love to, but I haven't yet.
Well, you better do it soon because he's going to get harder to get really
Very
fast.
busy here soon.
So we had him at a conference I helped program about a year ago, and he is just a delightful guy. He's very WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. He came in, gave a great stirring talk, and I think it was a lunch keynote. And then, but what really told it for me was we had about 500 students, and a lot of them are from India and other countries, and they're young, and the attention span isn't always there. He had these kids riveted, and he was leaning over the edge of the stage, asking them questions and really engaging them. I was watching this, and I looked at the person next to me. I said, "This guy is Space Jesus." And I realized that's a bit of a stretch, but he's really, by all appearances, and I mean, look at his work with the charities and so forth, he's
Mhm.
just a good soul. So that bodes well in some ways. However, when you're looking for a NASA administrator, having studied the career of James Webb and a number of them coming up past the Apollo era,
Mhm.
the best ones have been the politicians that know how to fight with brass knuckles. Uh, Kind of the Bill Nelson school. I know where the skeletons are buried. I know what you did last summer. Don't mess with my programs. And that's not Jared. But what I think will happen is they will confirm, hopefully, him and a deputy that has the political savvy that's needed. That's something that,
Mhm.
that Jared doesn't yet have. He'll get it pretty fast. But in terms of the second half of your question, I'm extremely optimistic. I'm hoping it doesn't become a one horse show with SpaceX. I love SpaceX. They've transformed the industry. Nothing comes close. We live in a universe where SpaceX turns out a Raptor engine once per day or two for less than $1 million. And the traditional aerospace guys are still charging, I think last I looked, $130 million for a single RS-25, which is going to be what's powering the SLS. I don't know how you make that work. So I think there's some nerves at NASA over this, but it's probably time for some, I don't want to say shaking up, but some contraction and some
Mhm.
reexamination. And I think he's the right guy to do it. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that take. I think it's, to your point, maybe not like shaking things up, but somebody young, somebody fresh, that comes from a different background, somebody that's not a traditional government person that's spent their whole life there. He comes up from business, from tech, from being an entrepreneur. Maybe he will have a different perspective on how we run things, and maybe that
Yeah.
efficiency, that cost reduction perspective will help us, obviously, a lot of missions here and a lot of programs, but specifically getting to Mars. And his obviously close relationship with Elon can only benefit such programs. So I'm optimistic about it. I think it's a cool new type of person to be in that role. And like you said, he's just like such a likable guy. I follow him on social media, and he's always posting about his family and his kids, and the charities. He's running a marathon for a different nonprofit, and
Right.
I think that type of personality is just different from what we've seen before. So maybe it's going to be a positive change.
Well, and one more big positive, I think, is in a much smaller way than Musk and Bezos, but not dissimilar way. He's got skin in the game. He
Hmm.
spent a lot of money to go to space a couple of times.
Right, his
And
own
he
money.
is the guy that went to NASA and said, "Hey, you want me to fix the Hubble while I'm up there? I can do it." They said no,
Hmm.
but I mean, he's putting his money where his mouth is, and that takes a lot of belief and a lot of dedication and a bright future. So, I think some amazing things will happen, and we need it, because I'm sure you've talked about it on this show and elsewhere. The Artemis program isn't going well. We were supposed to be landing by now,
Hmm.
um, and there were delays in Apollo. Now, admittedly, Apollo had a lot more money, but we've been working in one form or another on getting back to the moon, and I'm talking about hardware for 20 years, almost exactly 20 years now since Constellation started,
Hmm.
and they're still fiddling with it, and the costs go up. I mean, for a mobile launching tower to cost, I think the last estimate was 2.3 billion with a B, after it started at, I think, 325 or something in that neighborhood, is
Hmm.
just nuts. And as Nelson has said, and I'm sure Isaacman will continue, cost plus contracting has to become a thing of the past. Now, the challenge is, can the standing aerospace companies that, well, we all know and appreciate survive that? Because so far, looking at something like Starliner, the picture hasn't been rosy. So, yeah, we have to place a lot of bets on Blue Origin and SpaceX here.
Hmm. Well, I love your point about budgets, contracts. I'm currently in a master's program at Thunderbird. In my program,
Oh,
it's space business policy, and one of our professors right now is the deputy CFO of NASA. So I'm hoping, Professor Shin, if you're listening right now, that you will come on, in the next couple months, and we can talk about what some of the NASA budget process looks like, what is the positives or maybe downsides of those cost plus contracts. But you bring up a good point there, Rod, and I'm curious, are you able to share some of the other names that were in the running, some of those that did not get picked? I mean, Jared was out of nowhere, but what were some of those
yeah.
other
I was
top
trying to
competitors?
remember right as I said it. So Greg Autry was one,
Of course, that
and
makes sense.
he came very close. And that's the program you're in, right?
Yeah.
The one
Yes, exactly.
that he put together. Yeah, okay. So
Yep.
you know who he is. He came very close to being confirmed as the NASA CFO in the end
Hmm.
of the first Trump administration, and then it was just the timing was bad. It got delayed, and it didn't happen.
Right.
I think he'd make a great number two if that went through. So he was there. Interestingly, Lori Garver was one,
Mm,
and lifelong Democrat under Obama, the deputy administrator. But she and a number of other people felt that she was neutral enough and sufficiently far away from the third rail that would be okay.
mm-hmm,
And the one I can't remember is who the third one was. It's obvious and it should be staring me in the face, but it's just not coming to mind.
mm-hmm,
But yeah, I think they made the right choice.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm very excited about it. We'll see what new cool and exciting, pivotal moments come with Jared at the helm. Um, that's some good feedback there. Well, I was
Well,
curious. Oh
yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I'm hopeful. One of the things that we're hoping, we just, one of my writers from Ad Astra and I put together an op-ed. He did most of that actually. A guy named John Cross, who's a wonderful writer, put together an op-ed kind of suggesting gently, what a good path forward would be because the
Mm-hmm,
timing is like just right. And one of the things that we were talking about was the FAA and approvals for SpaceX. And,
mm-hmm,
SpaceX struggles. And I don't want to belittle environmentalism. I'm a progressive, but, I don't really care about the darter snails or whoever it is they're worried about from the thunder of the Starship taking off, the super heavy. And I should, but I think it's important. I mean, whether we like it or not, regardless of your politics, it's pretty clear we're in a bit of a geopolitical struggle with China right now.
mm-hmm,
And, is it critical for us tactically to get back to the moon before they go the first time? Probably not. But is it critical strategically? I think it is because it's a big geopolitical moment, not
mm-hmm,
just how other people see us, but how we see ourselves. And at the rate Starship's been testing, we're not going to get there. I mean, that's the landing system. So the most recent thing I saw about the whole FAA regulatory process is they've drafted an approval for 25 launches coming up in 2025.
mm-hmm.
It's not through yet. It's got to go through public comment, but I think that helps a lot. So fingers crossed. I'm feeling very optimistic about that because now we're getting somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned China, and I think that's a good topic for us to cover. We've spoken about China on the podcast previously, but can you highlight some of the tensions right now, the geopolitical tensions that you mentioned? And in the first space race, it was the U.S. and Russia. Now it's seeming more like it's U.S. and China. Can you talk through what that policy is right now, like what the strategic plan should be for us to again compete with China to get either back to the moon, to get to Mars, to get out further in
Yeah.
space.
Well, there's my fantasy plan, which is we start funding NASA in 5-year increments and make decisions that don't get changed and put forth programs like Viper and Mars sample return and whatever at reasonable prices that don't get canceled. But that's not in the cards. And
Mhm,
as well as I do, probably better because you're in that program, how this works and how things get flexed and nudged around. I used to work at JPL as a writer, so I was friendly with a lot of the people up there. And this delay, if not outright cancellation of Mars sample return has been crushing to an awful lot of people that had put the last 10 years of their career into it. And it's a step backwards. Now, should it go the way they were going? I will note, I was talking to the chief engineer up there, he said, when they asked us how much, we said 6.5 to a maximum of 11 billion, not $11 billion. So that's a little bit of a, the way that came out in the press conference that Nelson did
Hmm.
seemed a little off, but it's still very expensive. But I'd like to see, you know, my fantasy mind wants to see the kind of dedication we had in the 60s. This was the national priority. People worked insane hours. I mean, basically, the Apollo people, a lot of them worked like SpaceX people do now, long
Hmm.
hours, uh, often with no overtime.
Hmm.
Many were non-union. Um, and you could say it was kind of an abusive time, but it was a national priority to get this done. Of course, at that time, we had an assassinated president that had overseen the beginning of this program. And I think that it's an interesting thing to wonder, would that have finished out the way it did had we not had a martyred president behind it?
Hmm.
I don't want to see that happen again, certainly,
Hmm.
but I would like to see it get that kind of priority. Now, here's China with, as far as we know, a de facto permanent ruler, and budget's not an issue. They do things much cheaper than we do because labor is very inexpensive in there. They have a massive, very well trained workforce, especially in technology and the sciences,
Hmm.
and they're moving fast and they're not slowing down. They have one other advantage, I think, too. Um, it's a very nationalistic program.
Hmm.
Uh, if you read their white papers, there's a lot of talk about national identity and the need to be first, and it kind of edges up towards this is the beginning of us taking over the world again because we used to run a big part of it and we should be now. And I'm paraphrasing here, obviously. Um, but I think if you look at, there was a recent Ipsos poll, which was, I think it was last year, which is the first international poll of space attitudes that
Uh-huh.
anybody could remember. And China and India, they're feeling it and the people are behind it. And not everybody. I mean, there's always the outliers. Certainly, there's a lot of people in poverty in both places that probably aren't very excited about it. But in general terms, if you're talking to first market people, there's a lot
Hmm.
of excitement about it. And China in particular, and India also, have done something very smart, which is, we name our spacecraft after famous warships
Hmm.
or explorers or
Hmm.
mythological characters.
Yep.
The
Yep.
Chinese have been very careful to name their spacecraft after things that are deeply woven into their national mythos and psychology going back millennia.
Hmm.
And I think that resonates with people. But really, it's scheduling and money and commitment, and we seem to continually fall short on that. And it's kind of heartbreaking.
Yeah. What do you think that the US could do to get that national support again like we had during the Apollo era? Obviously, not with the death of a president, but
Yeah,
right now NASA's budget is, was it less than 0.5%? How do we get more public support behind
right.
these programs so that we can get it back to what it was during the Apollo era and how much support we had, both from a
Oh, well,
public and financial support?
so the budget will never come back to 5%, which is roughly
Mhm.
what it was in the 60s. So it's a tenth of that now. So they're doing a lot more with a lot less. Plus, let's not forget, back in the day, we had an occasional planetary probe going out and the human spaceflight program and some satellites, and that was it. Now
Mhm.
there is stuff everywhere. It costs to maintain it, it costs to monitor it, it costs to build the new things,
Right.
satellites, earth sensing, all that stuff. So there's a lot more going on. um I just lost my train of thought there. uh Repeat the last half of the question.
Just how do we get support to
Oh
get
yeah,
back that
okay.
public level?
So let's real quick do some myth busting here. So there's a popular conception, and I had a short debate with Dr. Zubin about this at one point, about the golden age of Apollo. Public support has always been about 50-50. So if you look at the polls going back to the early 60s through yesterday, if you say, do you think NASA's great? You bet 70%, roughly. If you say, should America maintain leadership in space? 45 to 55, 60%. Bravo. That's good enough. That's what it was back during the space race, more or less, with some exceptions.
Mhm.
But if you ask specific questions like, is it urgently imperative that we go back to the moon? Now you're getting about 12 to 17%. How about bringing back rocks from Mars? maybe 10 to 15%. So the
Hmm.
public's pretty wobbly about it. Of course, up until recently, if you ask that same public what percentage of the federal budget does NASA get, that answer would range from a high of 25%. Imagine that. We'd be living on condos in Jupiter by now, to 12%, 10%. And as you said, it's half of 1%. And it's astonishing how many people don't know that. So that's the state of it. So actually, the support, weirdly, it seems like it has, and I was there, as a kid, but the support hasn't waned as much as we think it has.
Hmm.
I think what's wavered is the political leadership and the commitment at those levels, and a couple other things. It's not the first time this time. These are repeats of things we've done. We had the whole shuttle era going in between.
Hmm.
And NASA's much more safety conscious. I've been doing interviews with one of the Apollo flight directors for the better part of a year for a project I'm working on. And I said, what changed? And he said, we were unstoppable. We didn't know, but we knew we had to be safe and get these guys back home. But
Hmm.
we were also, and the astronauts were very comfortable taking big chances. We've
Hmm.
become much more risk adverse and much more concerned about having to have success. And I understand that, because anytime, NASA, if NASA goes bowling and they accidentally put the ball through a wall instead of over the pins, Congress starts an investigation and there's a big hue and cry. And we all know space flight's dangerous as hell,
Yeah.
and accidents are going to happen. And so there's a question of risk aversion here. How much are we willing to accept? And I know for a fact, because I live in a household with a Chinese woman in it, and she grew up in Shanghai, and she's still close to a lot of people there. I think they'll do whatever it takes, and they will put their crew at substantially more risk, in my opinion, than we will.
Hmm.
And I don't buy the 2030 flight deadline at all. It's got to be 2029, because that's the 80th anniversary of the People's Republic of China founding, and they're really big on that. So if
Hmm.
we don't get our act together and figure out what to do with this big, bloated, expensive space launch system vis-a-vis Starship and New Glenn, we're going to come in second place, and a lot of people are going to be very hurt.
Hmm. Do you think that maybe if that is the case, that it will spark something in Americans that like, hey, we're no longer number one, like we
Mhm.
have traditionally been, and we think of ourselves as, quote, world police. Are people going to see, oh, if China gets there, wow,
Yeah.
we're no longer the superpower that we thought we were. Will that ignite something in us? And no, like we have to be
Yeah.
back to number one.
I would hope so. What seems to happen at times like that is Congress stands up and looks at NASA and says, "How could you let this happen?" And NASA has to say, "Hey, you guys control the purse strings. We've been
Yeah.
ready for 20 years. Give me a break." Um, so I think there will be outrage, especially in this administration that's coming in. I
Mhm.
think the public will be split between outrage and feeling demoralized, and some people saying, "I don't really get why it matters. I just want to be able to buy all my cheap stuff from China." But my
Yeah.
hope would be, and certainly in our community, there's going to be outrage, may be too strong a word, but a lot of strong disappointment and some bitterness, because we could have done this a long time ago. I mean, we did it before. We've been trying to rebuild, in one sense or another, the Apollo program, as I said, for 2 decades.
Mhm.
And it just, I know it's hard, but it shouldn't be this hard. We know how to do it. We just haven't committed the resources to it.
Right. No, that's a great point. We've done it. We could do it again, but yeah, the financial support, hasn't been there quite on the same level, and that's been the major
Yeah.
hindrance.
And
Um,
to be fair, Apollo was sortie missions. I mean, that was a quick dash
mhm.
out, do some exploring, quick dash back.
Yeah.
Artemis is trying to be more sustainable, and I understand that. But the way it's heading now, I'm sure you read the same stuff I do, that sustainability idea is really tapering down, and we're almost returning to the idea in many ways, at least in the first two or three landings, of just
Mhm.
doing sortie missions again. They just happen to be doing a different part of the moon. So the
Yeah.
water resources are important. We need them. That's the gateway to the rest of the solar system, makes it
Mhm.
affordable, sustainable. All that stuff is great. But we do have to decide whether we really want to take the time to make something lasting and sustainable, or if we just want to get back and worry about that other stuff later.
Yeah, that's another conversation about the sustainability, and we're seeing all the satellites that are orbiting right now that are eventually going to die, to deprecate, and what do we do with all the space junk then? And I know that's a big question. And so yeah, I had a question for you as well about what are some new business opportunities? I mean, you've seen the evolution of the space industry, and now we're starting to see the commercial sector really take off. We're seeing these private companies, these startups that are coming into the industry, and they're bringing new ideas. I mean, I had an opportunity to interview Kristen Whittingham from MaxSpace, president over there, and they're doing an inflatable habitat. So we're seeing these new ideas enter the market. So is there anything that you're particularly excited by? Maybe a new business venture,
Yeah.
asteroid mining, or something like that? What are you excited about from the commercial, the private sector?
Well, if anybody was foolish enough to ask me what they should do, I would say don't build a rocket, because we got plenty of launch vehicles. We got lots. I mean, there's so much capacity in Starship. If it starts flying at any rate,
Yeah.
you could fly lead rovers to Mars 10 at a time and you still wouldn't fill it up. It's going to have a conveyor belt leaned up against it. They're going to be saying, what do you want to fly? So, I mean, that's an opportunity right there. One of the things that I've seen recently that was really exciting was Icon Build over in Austin, Texas, who are working on 3D printed structures. And they
Yeah.
have across the street from their plant, they've got these extruded, weird looking, kind of bloppy, but very cool looking structures. And they have a big division of the company that's working on moon structures, trying to figure out waterless concrete and what kind of binders to use and that kind of thing. And I found that really exciting. Now,
Mhm.
it's, the problem, of course, with investing in space is it's not a fast return for the most part. If
Right.
you're building something that NASA says, okay, we'll plunk $30 million on you, that's a good day. But if you're one of the 90x% that are operating in this sector, and hoping against hope they might actually turn the corner and get a good payday in 5 or 7 years, that's
Mhm.
harder. And we know there are people still working. I know some people, I'm sure you do too, on the asteroid mining endeavor. And ultimately I think it's good, but it's funny. I was interviewing Steve Jurvetson a few years back, who's the billionaire that basically saved SpaceX in
Yeah.
2008 with this huge infusion of cash, and he's a space fanatic. And I said, tell me some of the things you'd invest in. And he said, well, asteroid mining ain't one of them. And I said, why?
Mm.
And he said, because we're not ready. It's too
Okay.
far out. It's too complicated. And of course, for those of us who read science fiction, you start moving big rocks around in space and people get nervous. Now, that's just one way of doing it. There's plenty of ways of doing it,
Mhm.
but that's probably not it. But I mean, I think it's support and infrastructure. We really need to get cislunar infrastructure going. So the party or parties that figure out how to do tank farms in Earth orbit and lunar orbit, I think are going to do very well. The party or parties, there's a lot of boring stuff that you have to do, right? Somebody has to design those tanks. Somebody has to design the bracing that holds them. And if they're removable and are made to be transported from the Earth to the moon and back to move fuel derived from lunar or asteroid resources, somebody's got to figure out that. Somebody's got to figure out the electronics. Somebody's got to figure out how to keep people alive on Starship because it doesn't have a life support system yet, all the
Yeah.
way down to look at how difficult it's been. And this one blows my mind. So the last lunar EVA spacesuits were built in the late 60s, used in Apollo. The
Mhm.
last orbital spacesuits for NASA for the space station were, I think, built in the late 80s. So they're really old. So now
Mhm.
we need a new lunar EVA suit, right? So you can go down and walk around down there without
Yeah.
chopping a hole in it and depressurizing to death. It appears to be really hard. It's years behind schedule. Is that just money? When you talk to the engineers, I've talked to a number of senior and lead engineers in these areas. A lot of it appears to be just the loss of intellectual capability. Those people all retired. A lot of them are gone,
Yeah.
like permanently gone, and they're having to reinvent things over again. And it's not cost effective. It's hard to do. It's really expensive. The example was on the landing of I think it was Curiosity. I did a book on that, and I was interviewing the chief engineer on that. He said, you know, we wanted initially when they were trying to figure out how to land before they did that wacko sky crane thing. He said, we just wanted to set down on the surface with the rover, no lander stage, just big engines on either side.
Yeah.
And the Viking lander on Mars in the 70s had these large engines with multiple tiny nozzles so that they wouldn't dig a big hole in the ground and mess up their immediate research territory. But those guys were gone. They couldn't get the intel back, and the record keeping was not great. And that's even
Mm,
worse with Apollo because they were moving so fast. There's a lot of stuff that just either got lost or tossed.
yeah.
So there's been this tremendous drain of resources. And, you know, electronics, of course, have advanced massively since that time, but mechanical engineering and physics less so. So, you know, there's still a lot of stuff you probably need to do the way they did it before.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point. And the conversation always goes back to, do you have a customer? If you're trying to start a new space business, you want to be a space entrepreneur like a
Yeah.
Bezos, like a Musk, even, Rocket Lab. But who is your customer, and is it only the government? And like you said, there's a lot of launch services, but
Yeah.
what else is out there? Um,
Well, so let me make a comment on that if I
yeah,
could. So
yeah.
I thought NASA did something very weird and very smart a few years back, which was to say, if you go to the moon and pick up a scoop of dirt, we'll buy it. Oh, do we have to bring it home? Nope, just keep it there. We'll pay you for it. It seemed wacky at first, but once you parse it out and think about it, that makes a lot of sense, and it's a
Mhm,
good investment. I would really like to see, and a lot of other people would like to see, a commodities exchange in orbit so that people know, you know, if I go process 100,000 gallons of fuel on the moon from lunar water and bring it back to Earth orbit to supply rockets that are heading out moonward, that I
mhm.
can get X number of dollars per liter or per gallon for this. And that's probably going to have to come from a NASA or some consortium because I don't think business has the wherewithal or really the motivation to do it yet.
Mhm. Yeah. Let's see. Like, do you happen to know about like intuitive machines? I mean, they obviously landed soft, rough landed
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
moon. What's their next steps? Are they trying to fall in that line? Bring back lunar dust, lunar rocks. What is intuitive machines working on? Do you know? I'm just not
And my
familiar.
recollection is they've got two more flights planned, and I believe they're both delivering instrument packages. I don't think there's a sample
Mm,
return there yet. And you know,
okay.
sample return is interesting because it's a great technological achievement, and we would like to see stuff coming back from the South Pole because we don't have any of those samples, but we got a
Hmm.
lot of moon rocks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Apollo. 850 pounds of moon rocks. That's not bad. Other people are bringing back ounces and grams. So South Polar region's a different story, but just in terms of the bulk sample return,
Hmm.
you know, other than for the geologists, it just doesn't feel as compelling to me anyway as getting boots on the ground. And as I'm sure you've read 100 times, you probably talked about it in your grad program. You know, one guy with a rock hammer could do in about a week what Curiosity has been doing since 2012 because it's just faster and it's
Hmm.
intuitive, and we don't have big sci-fi robots yet that can go out and do that.
Right. Not yet, but I'm sure
Not
we'll see.
yet.
We'll see that coming. Well, of course, I have a bunch of other questions for you, but I want to make sure that I throw in some audience questions.
Sure.
There's one here from William who asks if spin launch is a dead deal or innovative.
Well, it's a good question. I've heard it asked by other people. It, their approach to it's innovative. The idea of slinging things up fast enough to escape velocity isn't new. I mean, we've seen that as far back as Jules Verne with the Columbia Space Cannon out of, interestingly, sited in Florida. Um, the way they're doing it's different. My understanding, and I haven't checked for months, is that things had slowed down and they're still working on it, and they have done uh, working, I think, with partners, more work on hardened payloads that can actually take that kind of acceleration because, you know, you or I wouldn't do well. We'd turn into a little puddle of red goo. But beyond that, I know they're still in business, but that's all I know.
Got it. Okay. No, that's a good update. We have another question from Doug who asks, does SpaceX need cislunar infrastructure to get to either the moon or Mars?
Oh, do they ever? So, if you've been watching the same press conferences I have, about 3 months ago, They had a SpaceX rep on it was a NASA presser, but they had a SpaceX rep on, and one of the reporters said, "I'd like to ask the representative for SpaceX, just how many refuelings is it going to take for the human landing system to get to the moon and do what it's got to do?"
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "Well," she kind of wandered around the question but didn't answer it. And to his credit, Bill Nelson said, "Ma'am, I believe what the reporter was asking is exactly how many refillings is it going to take to get that thing to the moon?" And the answer, I believe, was at that point between 7 and 16. The last number I saw was between 12 and 24. That's a lot of coordination. That's very sophisticated choreography. Now,
Mm-hmm.
towards that end, I was at the Cape a few weeks ago, and although it's nothing at the rate that they're going to need for that, SpaceX launched 2 Falcon 9s out of KSC and Canaveral range on the same afternoon, about 4 hours apart.
Mm-hmm.
That's extraordinary. I mean, we live in a world where old space was launching maybe once every 3 months. And these
Mm-hmm.
guys, and it's like, oh, Monday, time for another one, push the button.
Yep.
But it would be great if they had the kind of infrastructure in orbit where ultimately we could be bringing back fuel created from the moon. Now, methane's a different conversation. But for instance, for Blue Origin, um, let's see, I think they're using hydrogen in the upper stage, right?
I think so.
Can't remember.
Don't quote
Yeah,
me. Somebody will correct
but
us if we're
they
wrong.
could be. They could be. So if somebody can start working with hydrogen, liquid oxygen, Bob's your uncle, and we just create a big tank farm up there. But yeah, forward positioning stuff, one way or the other, is going to become really important.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, I haven't been to Starbase. I know there's some people that have toured around there. I have been down to SpaceX Hawthorne, and it's like walking, GM plant with rockets instead of cars. I mean, it's jaw dropping.
Mm-hmm.
And it was brilliant. Besides the other brilliance of Master Elon and Gwynne Shotwell and so forth, because there's a lot of people supporting him in this. It's amazing how that he had the foresight to set this up as an assembly line. Because if you've been to other places where they build rockets, everybody's in little white gowns and booties, and they're doing things very delicately. And there's a part of SpaceX that needs to do that too. But if you go look at the interstages of the boosters, they're whacking away with hammers and grinders and stuff, and it's very Soviet in its approach in a way. And so, if anybody could do it, it's those guys. The thing that has me scratching my head about Blue Origin for years is there's this big facility in Washington. There's other facilities in Texas. There's this huge facility over at KSC now, which I go to from time to time because the National Space Society has their offices there now. So
Mm-hmm.
you pass this big building and you see trucks with stainless steel and tanks of chemicals and scotch tape and coffee and everything else going into the front of this factory. And then there's this moment of industrial constipation because nothing comes out the back door. It's like, when you guys going to build a rocket? So finally, we've seen a rocket come out the back. It's on the pad. That's great. But it's been 24 years now since Blue Origin started. And I have yet to see a story that makes sense about why it's taking so long. It's a real head scratcher to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe we'll get somebody from Blue Origin on the podcast and we can get some answers to that question. And industrial
I bet you
constipation,
won't.
I'm going to have to work on that or use that in a future conversation. I'm going to try to incorporate that. That'll be my
I don't
goal
know
for.
if I'd say that to them. I mean, they're really nice people. They gave your organization money. They gave my organization money. As a tax thing. But I mean, that was very generous, and I laud and really enjoy Jeff Bezos's vision, his dedication. He's put a lot of money into it. It's just weird to see a private new space old startup like that going slower than NASA does. So
Mhm.
yeah, I'd like to know too. But if you've worked in journalism at all, you know, getting news out of SpaceX sometimes feels like you're dealing with the Soviet Union back in the old days. Not that bad. I'm
Mhm.
exaggerating, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
And Blue Origin's kind of like getting stuff out of North Korea. I mean, they do releases, but if you have a specific question beyond that, it's like, sorry, okay, it's
Yeah.
got to go.
Right. Right.
So,
Right.
it's tough.
Let's see. I mean, obviously they've got New Glenn. They're going the commercial route. They've got space travelers. Aren't they working on a? Is it a lunar lander that they're contracted
They're
for?
working on Blue Moon for people, which is a lunar lander. They're working on a cargo version, and now they're working on Blue Ring, which
Okay.
is a tug, a cislunar tug. So it's amazing that they're working on a lot of fronts. Some of them are NASA paid, some of them aren't so much. So again, this big, great vision, if it comes together at the right time, that's going to be wonderful. But SpaceX is a hard act to beat.
Well, speaking of that, I see we have a question that asks almost exactly that. Um, let's see. Robert asks, "How long do you think it will take Blue Origin to catch up with the cadence of SpaceX?"
I don't think they will, because SpaceX was designed from the point that Musk pivoted to the Falcon 9 and especially Starship. It was designed to be done en masse, fast, lots of fabrication. If we lose three of them, it doesn't matter. We got 17 more back in the garage. My understanding of Blue Origin is that wasn't their model. They want to
Mhm.
build a lot of rockets, but they want to build a smaller number of them and fly them more frequently. And they don't have this. There isn't this overriding goal of we got to settle Mars, we got to settle Mars, we got to settle Mars. If Bezos has a big goal, it's human settlement of Earth orbit or Lagrange points. So it seems to be a different overall design in terms of what he's got in mind for this.
Yeah. So they're not quite in the same race right now. Let's see. We've got
Certainly not in the same position.
yeah, yeah. Let's see. We've got another question here. What is your opinion on U.S. Space Force and the possible weaponization of space? That's a good one.
You know, I asked somebody in the military this question a while ago because in Space Force adjacent, because I was thinking, we're very worried about anti-satellite weapons, and we should be.
Mm-hmm.
And we have them. We know how to use them. Russia, same story. China, same story. India, same story. However, we have very limited supply, and so do they. You can only take out a few targets, and you got to do it very carefully. However, we have SpaceX with Starlink up there, with I think now almost 6,000 or just over 6,000 satellites. They're
Right.
slow with little Hall thrusters, but within a given limit, any of those can be redirected towards a known orbit of another satellite. So if you look at it that way, we have the largest kinetic weapon system in orbit in history. I
Mm-hmm.
hope that's not what it comes down to, but you could. Um, but in terms of Space Force, it's hard to say because I mean I love them. They buy copies of my book every year as a text, which is delightful. But they have this huge budget, some of which we know about, some of which we don't. And by the very nature of what they do, we're not allowed to know as much as we like to know. So we've got the XB-37 doing cool things, but so much of it is cyber and satellite surveillance and unsexy things being done on the ground to try and maintain the good health and safety of the orbital assets we have. I'm glad they're there. I wish I knew more about what they were doing, but I'm really glad they're there. That said, I hope they could start doing more, because if we got into a serious conflict with somebody, if we got too many space assets wiped out, as we've seen with what's going on in Ukraine, you could be in real trouble.
Yeah, have massive impacts. Absolutely. Another question here, and I love this topic because I'm,
Okay.
big advocate of STEM education. But this question was from a listener. What would be your advice to young people interested in pursuing careers in space science or engineering?
Well, as a person who didn't make it through my space science degree, I have to predicate it on that because I had to switch ponies in the middle of the race. Um, the same thing everybody else says, and there's a gentleman named Rob Manning, who's the chief engineer at JPL until recently, saw every Mars rover that went up and a lot of other projects. And
Hmm.
he's one of those guys that got interested in engineering, went straight through college, got to Caltech, went straight through Caltech, and boom, he's at JPL, and he's had this stratospheric career ever since. It's not easy to become chief engineer with a bachelor's degree. Okay.
Hmm.
They like PhDs at NASA. So
Yeah.
it's a remarkable story. And I've spent a lot of time with him, and he just did it. Now, in my case, I struggled and struggled and struggled, and it just clearly I didn't have a brain for advanced math and physics. So I guess if I had any advice, it's cliche, but it's find your bliss. Find what you enjoy doing, because if you enjoy doing it, you'll do it better. And if you do it better, then you can rise to the top, which isn't to say you shouldn't work hard and persevere. but we had, I think it was Eileen Collins at a conference a while back, and she gave this great talk. She's not typical astronaut material. She
Mm-hmm.
kind of screwed around in school, didn't really know what she wanted to do, went to junior college for a while, you know, like a lot of us did, and was kind of not, she was not a straight arrow. And then finally she got inspired, I think, by one of her professors. And next thing you know, she's in the Air Force and she's flying planes, and there's male pilots next to her going, "Hey, honey, haven't flown with the women before." And she would look at them and say, "That's okay, I'll show you how it's done." And you know, she commanded shuttle missions and is a legend within the ranks. So this isn't really a very good answer, but the only way you're going to get it is to find your North Star and just go after it. That said, you know, when I was young, if you wanted to work in space, you either got a job with NASA or you got a job with the military or you worked for a traditional contractor. There are
Mm-hmm.
very set lines. It was like
Right.
railroads. You know,
Right.
now there's so many different ways to get into this. That's what I find wonderful. And every couple of months I read about some weird business that somebody thought up. A while back, we had a contest that we do at the International Space Development Conference called the Rothblatt Competition for a business plan that will advance space settlement in some way. This guy came up with LifeShip, which is sending DNA to the moon. I wouldn't have thought of that, and they're doing it. So, you know, he's found a business niche that's going to work very well for him, and he didn't have to be an engineer or scientist to do it.
Mm-hmm. 100%. I absolutely agree with you. You know, as my fellow cohort says, finding our space in space. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a scientist. That is not my expertise, and I know that. But I know communications and I know business, and that's my way of getting into the space industry. So getting
Well,
to talk with
and
wonderful people like you.
and and you're taking that program, which was a very
That too.
smart decision. It's a good
Yeah.
program. You're going to, if you haven't already, you're going to meet a lot of people just in your cohort that are going to be really handy later, but also through Zahir and the people running it, you
Mm-hmm.
get exposed to all kinds of other things that as just regular civilians wouldn't happen in a decade. So I think you might tell people what the program's about because it's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the masters for space leadership, business, and policy through the Thunderbird School of Global Management is an opportunity for those that want to get into the space industry. Like most of the students in my cohort, we're all, you know, in this point of transition where we want to be in the space industry or we want to make you know, a career move at some point. And we're all passionate about space, so it's giving us that foundational understanding of the space industry, but also from, again, a business, a leadership, you know, a policy, a regulation perspective. And again, trying to find, you know, where's our niche? Where do we fit in the space industry? So yeah, it's been a wonderful opportunity, and I've made a lot of great connections and met a lot of cool people like yourself. And so yeah, I'm excited to
Thank you.
see where the program goes. And like I said, you know, we just had a Professor Steve Shin, who's the NASA Deputy CFO for global finance and accounting. I never thought I would like finance and accounting, but actually he made it really interesting, and that's one of my favorite classes so far. And he's a great professor and a good guy, so I'm excited to learn from him. Yeah.
Well, behind all the people doing research and bending metal and pounding rivets and doing all that thing, there's a lot of business practices that have to go in to
Hmm.
make that work, whether it's NASA or private industry. And there aren't many programs teaching that stuff. You're in one of
Hmm.
the few. So I
Yeah,
think it's really
absolutely.
well designed. Shout out to Greg Autry. Well
Yeah.
done, sir.
Shout out Greg. Yeah, he's the reason that, you know, I originally heard about the program. He came to speak at a Mars Society convention, and that's where I first met him, and he told me about it. So yeah, shout out to him. He's always recruiting.
Was that in Los
Um,
Angeles, that one?
let's see, that was 2 years ago, so that would have
Hmm.
been Arizona. Arizona
Okay.
2 years ago. Yeah,
That makes sense. Yeah.
this year it would have been this year, Seattle. So we're in the works for next year. I'm not exactly sure where we're going to be, but hopefully you'll get to be there as well, and we can reconnect.
Yeah, that'd be fun. I see a question just popped in saying,
Oh
Rod,
yeah.
is there a timeline that connects science fiction to science fact? And we don't have time to answer that, I don't think. But I will say tomorrow night, I'm doing my once per month science fiction to science fact evening with WGN Radio in Chicago, which, you know, it's late at night, so it covers like 40 states or something. And that's one of the topics we do. Actually, tomorrow night, we're talking about Alien versus Aliens, the movies. But in theory, we're supposed to be talking about science to science fiction. So check it out if you have time.
Oh, I love it. Okay. Well, I'm gonna have to give that a listen tomorrow. But Rod, I just want to say thank you so much for being
Thank
here. It was
you.
such a pleasure to get to chat with you and learn from your perspective and yeah, wealth of information. So I really appreciate your
Thank
time.
you. Well, and great interview. Not everybody can do that, so kudos to you because it's not easy.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Want to give a special thanks to our executive director, James Burke, PR director, Michael Stoltz, our friend.
James.
Yeah,
Sorry.
James, he's probably tuning in as well. Our friends at Liftport, Michael and Leah, and just want to say thank you everybody that has tuned in today and just give a call out and a shout out. Like this is a wrap for our final episode of 2024. Can you believe it? Thank you to all of our guests and our listeners for an incredible year of insights, of inspiration and support. We're at a pivotal time in space exploration with humans to Mars closer than ever. So, thank you to the work of all of those individuals and especially like organizations such as the Mars Society. So here's to 2025, to pushing boundaries, exploring new frontiers. Yeah, exactly. And as I always say, the best is yet to come. Thanks, everybody.